A big warm welcome back to SCale Model Fix and part 4 of our ongoing Tamiya 148 scale Bristol Beaufighter TF.Mk.X video build. So at the end of part 3 we left the model pretty much waiting for decals, with a few odds and ends just to be completed to bring this quite enjoyable build to an end. So without further ado, let's have a look at the markings that we're going to be using. And in this instance, with the kit being in the stash since probably 1999, 2000, I'm not going to trust the kit decals, they looked fairly ropey. So in this instance we're going to use an aftermarket sheet available from Hannants for extra decal sheet X48188. So there's 4 marking options contained on the aftermarket decal sheet in various camouflage configurations. So we've got dark sea grey over sky twice, we've got camouflage over PRU blue, and a Burmese based aircraft in grey, brown and green. After much debate we settled on portraying Bristol Beaufighter TF.Mk.X RD427EOO, and this is a 404 Royal Canadian Air Force Squadron Coastal Command based in Scotland in 1945. So there's some helpful hints printed on the sheet to assist the modeller in their quest to portray their aircraft, and it says modeller's note: RD427 had the standard nose and fin fillet but no intake behind the cockpit, and that's illustrated up here as you can see on those 2 airframes. So we're not having the cockpit intake available, not having real time or enthusiasm to scratch build it. We settled on this one because it has got the spinner caps and the fin fillet anyway. The decal sheet appears to be well printed and is by microscale, so we shouldn't experience any problems applying these to the model, and there's not all that many to go on, in all fairness. The upper and lower surface markings are on the back of the decal placement guide, and as you can see there's only the 2 roundels on the wings, there's nothing underneath, and then we've got the fuselage codes and tail fin flash, and that's it for this one. So hopefully a quick decal process. So we're going to start the decal process by removing the required markings from the sheet with a Swan Morton knife. And we're just going to work on those wing markings to start with. Now I've got some warm water just to the side of me that's ready to go. So I prefer to move these little numbers as they do have a habit of floating free and then getting trapped under the decal or stuck to the model. Now with this being microscale decals, I can't foresee any problems with using set or sol. Be careful if you're going to use some of the stronger setting solutions such as Daco or Solver Set or something like that, just to make sure. I would test them on one that you're not going to use, just to make sure they don't destroy your marking completely. So the decal's loose on its backing sheet now, so we're just going to lubricate the surface of the model with a little bit of water. You could use setting solution if you wish, and we're just going to slide it off the backing paper into position. Like so. And then getting a piece of clean kitchen paper, just going to absorb the water from the marking, and then just tease it into its final resting place. Just like that. So we're now going to add our setting solution So we've got to make sure that the decal is perfectly placed and that we no longer need to manoeuvre it into place, or there's any air bubbles caught underneath it, anything like that, because once we've added the setting solution, that's going to be it. We're going to have to just leave it. We don't want it to pool up, we want a nice even coat. I'm going to crack on and put on the remainder of these decals, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look at the finished result. So after a short session decaling, we've now got the identity on our Beaufighter. So as you can see, everything went down fantastically as expected. If anything, I think the serials are slightly small because it was hard to try and get them into the position it shows on the sheet, but nonetheless quite a pleasing overall result. So we'll leave those to thoroughly dry overnight, and then we shall give them a quick coat of Johnson's Clear just to seal them in and to make sure that the wash doesn't creep under the decal in the next bit of the video. So the decals are dry. They've gone down quite well, certainly over that raised area on the wings. So using a Q-tip or a cotton bud, we just got some Johnson's Clear floor polish in a little dish. Just a great believer if you never put anything in a bottle of fluid so you don't risk contaminating it. And we're just applying some of the clear over these markings just to protect them and seal them in. When we put the wash on, we don't want any of the wash creeping under the carrier film on the decal and ruining it. You'll never get it back out. Just making sure we do them all, and it just helps to hide any carrier film at the edges of each decal as well. We're just going to set that down for perhaps half an hour to dry. So with the Johnson's Clear now dry and protecting those decals, it's time to think about adding a panel line wash. So we're going to use my trusted favourite, Flory Models Dark Dirt Wash. I like this product because it's clay based. If you make any mistakes or boo-boos, you can just simply wash it off. It's not solvent based or any thinners in there, so it doesn't react with anything that you've put on the model so far. And at this late stage in the game, we don't want anything to ruin our surface. So we just decant some into a dish. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of water, just because I don't want it too dark. And then we're just going to start applying this, just as we did to the undersurface earlier on in the video builds. And we're just going to highlight all the panel lines, including over the decals, to bring the detail out. You don't have to be neat, it doesn't have to be pretty, but just make sure you do get everywhere. And once this is dry, we can think about getting a varnish coat, matte varnish coat, onto the model, and then we can think about adding some streaks, gun smoke and things like that, oil stains and other bits of important surface wear. So I'll carry on doing this, and we'll have a look at the finished results in due course. So that Flory Models wash was left to dry probably about an hour, and then we've just set around removing it. So we've got some nice contrast there, the panel lines. So I've just been working on this wing, and as you can see I've removed the inboard side, and we're just going to remove this outer wing section. So I've not used any moisture apart from the really stubborn areas with this kit. So all I've done is produced a small square of tissue kitchen roll, kitchen paper, and we've just literally rubbed away at the surface of the model until that wash comes off, and it does come off. So this just catches some of the pigment in any of the raised areas and around those raised hatches, and just gives us a little bit more of a weathered look. And once we're happy we've removed everything, we can then think about getting a matte varnish on this to start bringing the model to a completion. So we'll just check round the leading edges, make sure nothing's run along any of the panel lines, and once we get that varnish on, it's trapped in there. And that's the end result. So we're going to get some varnish coat on this now, and then we can think about putting the smaller aerials, unmasking the glazing, sticking the observer's hatch on and the machine gun to complete the finish. So with the wash removed and everything dry, the next bench sitting, a couple of days later, we've applied Tamiya XF86 thinned with cellulose thinners, or lacquer thinners, quite thin, nice even coats, and we've got that lovely matte surface to the model now. I've unmasked the landing lamp, which looks quite nice, and also the canopy. I've removed the top hatch and tried to remove the best I could any remains of the PVA that I had applied to stick it in place while we painted it. So I'll pose that in the open position, and the propellers need to be added. So again, these are poly caps, so these just push on the front, and we're starting to look somewhere near complete. The focus of our build now changes direction slightly. With the airframe completed and just sat drying next to me, it's time to have a look at some of the weaponry. So Tamiya include 3 weapon fits for our Beaufighter. The first one is rocket projectiles moulded with the launch rails, and these are really crude and basic and definitely date the kit, as you can see. Another option is to have empty rails, so those projectiles will need removing, thankfully. Might be a good idea there if you wanted to load your Beaufighter up to look at some of the Edard brassing replacement weapons there. A couple of 500-pound bombs, again, bit crude, bit oversimplified, and a torpedo. On page 8 of the instruction booklet, which is step 16, Tamiya again thoughtfully informed the modeller that if the torpedo's fitted, then you need those empty launch rails as well. If you're having nothing on the centre line of the airframe, then you can have the projectiles on the launch rails. And finally, a couple of centerline 500-pound bombs, again with empty launch rails. So let's make a start with this weaponry, and we're going to remove the projectiles from the launch rails. But just prior to that, when I had the Alclad in the airbrush, I painted the pallets for the underneath the wings in aluminium, just to add a bit of visual interest, as there's no markings or anything on the undersurface of the Beaufighter that we've depicted. I just thought it would look a little bit better. Maybe not a truthful reproduction, but it is highlighted on the extra decal placement guide as one of those options, having these metal pallets. So I'm just making a start by removing the projectiles from the launch rails. To do that I'm just using a pair of side cutters and I'm just literally snipping them off. Like so. Oh. So before we go near these with any paint, we're now going to have to clean those stubs up. So just turn into the trusty Florey Models sanding sticks again. Just making sure there's no trace of those attachment points anywhere. Ready for the coat of primer. There's a bit of repetition here, there is 8 to do. So just working there with the last one of these rocket rails, just to complete that little mini task. And they're now completed. We have the Centerline Pylons, so these need to be cleaned up as well, so we'll just remove these from the spray. I'm just going to carefully pare those off. And we have the sway braces as well for these, so I think I'll paint those on the spring. Last but not least, weaponry wise, we have the machine gun for the rear observer's hatch. So it's time to get some paint on these bits and pieces, so I'll come back to you when that task's been completed. So I've just been busy off camera. I've added the observer's bubble and machine gun. I've also closed the canopy hatch. Both of these are held in place with tiny little beads of crystal clear. Underneath I've added those centerline pylons and also those launch rails. So all that's left to do on this now is to add the aerial and its wires, a couple of pitot tubes, and the build is complete. So I've just added the aerial to the spine and rigged that with some easy line. I don't know whether the camera will actually pick that up or not, but we can have a go. So easy line is an elasticated thread and it just allows for that little bounce back if you do inadvertently catch it. Underneath we've added the wing mounted pitot tube and we've also added some exhausts. They're aftermarket and they're from Metallic Details MDR 4812 and they're a mass improvement over what's included in the kit. So that completes our Tamiya 148 scale Bristol Beaufighter TF.Mk.X build. It's been very enjoyable, it's a very easy kit to put together. It allowed us to spend a little bit more time weathering the paint surfaces, and hopefully you've enjoyed following along with me. The kit is ideal for somebody who's not got that much experience within the hobby, as there isn't anything too complex in its assembly. So before we go for the studio reveal photos, we'll take one last tour of the airframe, just slowly for the camera. So there we go, that concludes our build. So until next time everybody, please look after yourselves, stay well and take care.